A few months ago, I was reminded that Christianity must be viewed with an eye towards what was happening in Judaism at the time, and it's a curious thing that I'd have to be reminded. Perhaps all too often, it is easy to assume that Christianity today is the same as Christianity 2,000 years ago, and though Christianity obviously owes much of its theology to Judaism, perhaps beyond the superficial connections, something is missing. The timeline of Judaism is not very well known. Certainly, the Old Testament and other Jewish works attempt to explain a timeline for Judaism, but many of these texts are highly suspect, both in original authorship and later manipulation. Judaism can, however, be divided into three parts with certainty. These divisions revolve around two periods of time. In approximately 300 BCE, Hellenized Judaism was born, and somewhere in the 1st century CE, Christianity and Rabbinical Judaism were born. Before 300 BCE, we have uncertainty. Traditionally, Jewish written works are assumed to give some accurate information, but textually, the dating trail goes cold, and before 300 BCE, we simply don't know in what form Judaism existed. The religion is assumed to have existed well before 300 BCE, but again, the dating trail goes cold. Like the Iliad and Odyssey, the Bible displays some facts, but its stories are clearly mythologized, and likely written much later from oral tradition. It is clear, however, that after 300 BCE, Judaism can be traced, and what one finds after 300 BCE is nothing short of proselytization. In other words, Judaism is going after converts, and whether or not Judaism existed before this time, traditionally, Judaism does not appear to be a religion bent on conversion. The attitude of Judaism itself before and after 300 BCE seems to be paradoxical. All of a sudden, the chosen ones have decided that others should be included, and Judaism splits into factions, with each group having different views on the details of conversion and proselytization. This Hellenized Judaism attempts to explain itself in a way that is palatable to Greeks. According to Philo of Alexandria, the works of Judaism are to be taken in two ways. First, and most importantly, is metaphor. According to Philo, it's the metaphorical sense that is all important and written for intellectual people. Secondly, the works of Judaism can be seen as factual. However, Philo seems to marginalize taking Judaism as fact, saying that the facts are for common people. Beyond this deference to the metaphorical, Philo goes on to speak in words that clearly indicate he is speaking to a Greek audience. He explains Judaism in Greek terms and attempts to fuse Jewish and Greek philosophy. In the Old Testament, this fusion is not so clear, keeping in mind that the final books of the Septuagint were probably written around 100 BCE at the earliest. But in the New Testament, this fusion of Greek philosophy into Judaism can be easily seen. John 1 states, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Word is logos in Greek. And logos was a Greek philosophical concept with several facets. Essentially, logos is intellect or word. And obviously, the word is an extension of intellect. Philo of Alexandria also speaks of this concept. This verse is a clear fusion of Greek philosophy and Jewish theology, and in breaking down this verse and the chapter, one gets to take a trip to the Old Testament, to the beginning. This is Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, the theological beginning of Jewish tradition. In verse 3, God speaks, "This is the word. It is the spoken word that John 1 speaks of. Through the power of his own intellect and the power of his spoken word, Genesis states that God created everything." Later, John goes on to claim that Jesus is also the Word, indicating that Jesus was a part of God's intellect and the power of his word or logos. This is a far cry from what Christians think this verse states today. Christians are generally oblivious to the historical aspect of the Jewish-Greek connection, and I would imagine that the vast majority of Christians think this verse is simply praising the Bible. They are wrong. And it's not just the logos that is fascinating here. If Jesus is the Greek logos, then what is this mysterious Holy Spirit? As it turns out, the Holy Spirit is also found in the beginning. In Genesis 2:7, God breathes the breath of life into human beings. The Greek word for breath is pneuma. It means wind, breath, or spirit. And the Hebrews had a word that meant exactly the same thing. Throughout the New Testament, and including the book of John, the word pneuma is used for breath, wind, or spirit. If Jesus is the Word, then the Holy Spirit is the breath of God. It is the pneuma, or breath, that carries the word, or logos. Somewhere in the more than 3 centuries between Alexander the Great and the creation of the New Testament, Judaism was so wrapped up in Greek philosophy that within certain factions, Judaism began to look very Greek. And after the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, the rabbinical era officially began, and Judaism would continue throughout the Greco-Roman world with varying views of conversion, salvation, and messiahship. Its offspring, Christianity, the Greco-Jewish cult of Jesus, would eventually flourish.